Hey, this is episode 27 of Outside the Bubble. I am your coach, Joanna Bull. Thanks so much for joining me today for this amazing conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate each and every one of you that listen. I heard today that there are 660,000 active podcasts on iTunes. I believe active means that creating new content. So, not ones where there's no more shows being produced, but ones where there are actually shows coming out. My understanding is that after a show makes it through episode number 12, that the host is really committed to continue going. And since this is episode 27, we have made it over that hurdle. And we've actually made it over that hurdle twice, which is awesome. This is a really special episode, especially for all my friends that are from Ontario, Canada, which is where I'm from. I live in Toronto. And just to give you some context, in Ontario, all of the teacher contracts are up. We are, quote unquote, heading into negotiations, and everybody has a real sense that this is going to be a tough one, maybe the toughest one that we've had for a while. So I'm in year 15 of teaching. I've been through 3 rounds now, I believe, of contract negotiations. The last one was not that great. In fact, we, as secondary teachers, just recently got a contract, and now we're starting all over again. There's a lot of speculation that we'll be on work to rule really early into the school year, quite possibly a strike, and quite possibly mandated back to work. So because I work with teachers every day, I feel the tension and I feel the stress and I feel the anxiety and the worry. And for my friends at school boards in Ontario, where there's major cuts going on for those that have lost their jobs and have been surplused to the system, which often means that there is no position for you. Like that's a big stressor when you no longer have a job and there's nowhere that you can go to have a job. Class sizes are being increased, and there's, a real sense that the worthiness of a teacher is just not there. I know that there are some people questioning whether or not this is the profession that they want to be in. So I just want to say that, teaching is an amazing profession. There's lots of times in my career where I've loved it and lots of times where I have not loved it, and you're about to hear some of that today with my guest. I get really personal and I share a story that was a very hard time in my life and a very hard time that lasted a very long time. And Diana really shed some clarity on what I was going through at that time. And I hope she can do the same for many of you. My guest today is Diana Zwinick, known to her students and clients as Diana Z. She taught high school English in a rural community for 12 years and founded a nonprofit 11 years ago that has helped thousands of teens in Chicago's western suburbs learn to speak their truths and accept themselves for who they really are while learning to write and tell their own stories. 2 years ago, Diana felt the need to leave the classroom because she felt emotionally unable to meet her students' needs anymore due to stress-related health problems and the conditions surrounding the education system itself. Today, Diana and I are going to have an incredible conversation about what you might actually be experiencing and why it's actually not burnout. Are you ready? Let's get this conversation started. Diana, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Joanna. It's really my pleasure to take part in the Outside the Bubble podcast. I'm so glad that you invited me.
So tell me a little bit about you, who you are, and what it is that you do.
All right. Well, my name is Diana Zwinick. Lots of people call me Diana Z because it's easier. I am a personal development coach with an organization called Naturally Free Creative Solutions for Educators. And what I do is I work with teachers who are feeling like their happiness in their job is fading. Maybe they're losing their joy, they're feeling burnt out, exhausted. And what I do is I help them see a vision of what their life would look like ideally, and I help them work to get to that vision so that they get their happy back, so that they are more enthusiastic in the classroom, so that they're more inspiring to their students. They've got more time for their family and their lives. And, if they find out that the classroom's just not for them, I help guide them to the next chapter in their lives.
That is so fantastic. And you were a classroom teacher, correct?
Yes, I was a classroom teacher for 12 years. I was a high school English teacher in a rural school district in Illinois, here in the United States. And yeah, I saw a lot of it. I had to leave after 12 years because the culture had changed a lot. I was losing my joy. I was becoming that teacher that I swore that I was never going to be. And I knew that I wasn't doing anybody a service, not me, not my students, by staying in that position. So I moved out and took some time away, came to some realizations about some things, and then came back because I'm like totally dedicated to the education profession, even if I'm not in the classroom anymore.
Now, we connected because I saw something that you had shared on Instagram, and it was just one slide. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have to have a conversation because it really spoke to me. And you talked about demoralization instead of burnout.
Mhm.
So, what are the causes of demoralization and how is it different from stress or from burnout?
When I left teaching, I felt sure that I was burned out, and I had been trying everything that I possibly could do up until the time I left to take care of myself, get more sleep, go get those mani pedis, do eat better, do all of that stuff, and it just wasn't helping. I'd feel better when I was on break. I'd meditate, I'd do all of that. I'd feel better, and then I'd step in that school building, and like everything would just come crashing back down on me. And then about a year ago, I saw a little snippet of a teacher named Gabby Stroud, who's a teacher in Australia, she's written a book called Teacher, who was discussing what had happened to her and her colleagues in Australia. And she basically said that it's not burnout, because burnout implies that you haven't eaten your vegetables, that you don't know how to take care of yourself, that all of these things that we all know about and that we're all doing, that we're just not good at it. And it puts that blame right back on the teacher. It's your fault life is this way, that you're not feeling the joy of teaching anymore. And she said, it's not burnout because we are doing this, it's demoralization. And just as an interesting fact, I guess I'll start first of all with the causes of demoralization. It's been studied what demoralization is by all kinds of different corporate think tanks and stuff who have been trying to guide individuals outside of education, and some of the more corporate pursuits. But basically what it comes down to is demoralization has 5 factors to it. It's feeling that you lack power or control over what happens to you and around you. Number 2 is being required to do things you don't think you should do. Number 3 is having too much asked of you or being overworked. Number 4 is experiencing a conflict with a coworker, a continuing, long, ongoing conflict. And so to me, when I'm thinking about education, I think your coworkers include your students, your colleagues, your administration, and even your students' parents. And then the 5th factor is feeling stuck in a job you dislike with no alternatives. And even one of those, if it's ongoing, much less several of those, can really, really affect a person. I looked at that list and I'm like, man, that is being a teacher. That's the dark side of being a teacher, all 5 of those factors. And when you hit those factors and you resolve them, to me, those are far more resolvable actually than being tired or being being frustrated or losing your compassion or things like that. When you hit all 5 of those causes of demoralization, the other things that you're taking care of for burnout begin to take care of themselves. You know, the self-care that you're doing, the things that you're doing to rest yourself, they take root and they support you when you've actually hit those 5 root causes of demoralization.
That's fascinating. I'd never heard of this concept before in the workplace. So let's just go over those again. I tried to quickly jot them down. So we have power is number one.
Right. You lack power or control over what happens.
All right. So we lack power or control over what happens. What's number two? I missed number two.
Number 2 is being required to do things you don't think you should do.
All right. So required to do things you don't think you should do. Number three was being asked too much.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have conflict. So an example you gave, ongoing conflicts with your coworker.
Right.
Okay. And then number five is feeling like you're stuck.
Yeah, you're feeling stuck in a job that you dislike with no alternatives. I've seen so many teachers that are like, well, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't teach. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't teach here. You know, teachers have so many skills that are applicable either within their school, in a different school, or even in a different industry if that's what they feel like they need.
Listening to you go through that list and then going through it again myself, I like it really resonates for me. There was a time when I was in a school. I'd been in the same school for a very long time. I had a really great gig, an amazing department head. The school had fantastic students, just like everything you could really wish for. I went there the second year that the school was opened, was able to buy the resources that I wanted and really grow my department. I was a visual arts teacher there, had a full computer and media lab. So, like, there were tons and tons of benefits to the school for me. Then a principal came that I just did not get along with. I'm going to full out say, like, she just didn't like me and I just did not like her. And she made things very uncomfortable. And she was one of those people where if you got along with her, it was great. If you didn't, it was terrible. And there didn't seem to be a middle ground. And people would say, like, stick it out. She's going to leave. You can ride it out. But I will honestly say, going through this list, like, that's what it was for me. It was 5 years of all of these pieces. And it was incredibly tough. I took loads of sick days.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to go to school. I had a conflict with some students where I was not being supported. And it was, a number of years ago. So, like, early on in the time when, like, kids started to get cell phones and cell phones were in the classroom. And I was struggling with these two girls and their cell phones and their unfortunate adolescent female behavior, which when I say that, I'm sure many people know what that means. And yeah, it was an incredibly hard time in my life. And when I think about it, it's like I wasn't burned out. This was what was going on. I was really demoralized.
Helps on one hand when people are saying, oh, she's going to leave, just tough it out, whatever. But when you're feeling that demoralization, you begin to feel like, what's wrong with me? Why is it that I can't tough this out? And it's because you're looking more at the symptoms of what's going on than what's really happening. Because if you could have looked at this and said, hey, I feel like I'm lacking control over what happens here. My students have the cell phones. I'm supposing there was no real clear policy on that. They're bothering me. If you could just like point at that and say, this is because I'm lacking control over what happens, and you get that clarity, then you can figure out where to put your battles, where to put your efforts, what clearly to ask for.
That's definitely true. I mean, there were so many layers going on at that time for me. And I, to be honest, also didn't feel like I had the kind of relationship where I could even say how I was feeling or what was going on. So at that time in my life, like there were many days where I just woke up in the morning and I was like sick, like just calling sick. Like I can't
Mhm.
even deal with going. I knew it wasn't burnout. I knew I wasn't actually burned out because I loved what I taught and I loved the courses and the content. And it definitely wasn't burnout, but I didn't have a word to articulate what was going on at that time. And you gave me that word. So thanks for that.
What did you finally end up doing? Did you transfer to a different school? What happened?
Nope, that administrator left just like everyone said would happen, and someone else came in and there was a huge weight lifted off. But it was, like I said, 5 years, and it was a very hard 5 years, and I'm pretty open now with that story. The principal has retired, but, like, she said just some really, really terrible things to me,
Mm.
including I can't believe I'm gonna share this on the podcast. I have shared it with people, but I'm in, a consultant role now. I've been in the role for 3 years. The role came to be my very first year of teaching in 2005, and a teacher I worked with was seconded into the position, and I thought, "Well, that's an interesting job, like, I might be interested in doing that one day." So it was just kind of in the back of my mind, and a lot of things that I did professionally were in the hopes of one day being able to apply for the position. So the job comes up around every 4 years, so I went to my administrator at the time. The job had come up. I knew I wasn't ready, but I said to her, "I'd like to talk to you about something. This job has come up," and I gave her the details. "I'd really like to apply." And she looked at me like directly in the face and said, "I would never recommend you for that position." And then kind of just like waved me out of her office.
Ooh,
So instead of anything around, "I don't think you're ready at this point. How can I support you to get you ready? Go ahead and apply, but I don't think you're ready for it. Let's come up with a plan." It was just, yeah, and just waved me out. So she'd,
wow.
she'd been gone for a while. The position came up again. I was speaking with a vice principal at the time. And I said, "I want to talk to you about a job that's come up." And he was basically like, "Tell me about it." And then he said, "Let's figure out how to get you that position." So, like, the second time, completely different experience, and I wouldn't say I had a strong relationship with him. We didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but to me, that was like it was respect, right? He's now saying,
Mhm.
"Great, this is what you want. Let's figure out how to make it happen." So that's just 2 very different experiences, but when I approached that second administrator about it, I was a little bit fearful. I was fearful of the conversation that I might be entering into.
Right. What a difference administration makes.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. So everyone out there listening that, has been through something, there's a lot of people that have been through particular demoralization or demoralizing situations for sure. And we need to support each other.
That is so true. It just to have the support and having people recognizing what's going on, being able to put the word to it, talk about it is a world of difference.
So you had spoken about all the self-care that you were doing previously and that
Mhm.
it wasn't working. So why won't self-care work if you're demoralized?
Every time you go back, that situation is still there and the stress builds up. Even if you are able to calm it down for a little bit, that stress builds up and it stays there. And it's just like it's cumulative until you can get rid of the causes of it, until you can feel in control of what's going on with you. And even like as in your position, in your story, you can't tell the administrator what's going on. You can still find other ways to find control over what happens, whether it's policies you lay down in your classroom or saying yes to certain things and no to other things and being willing to bear the heat of it. You're still in control, you're still making decisions, you still have choice. And when you've got that undergirding of control, then to take care of the symptoms, to meditate, to sleep better, to do all of those things is really going to take hold in your body, in your life, in your mind, and move you forward.
So you went over a couple of strategies for number 1. Do you have a couple of strategies for each? Are we able to go over a couple of tips that you could give to teachers?
Sure, we can do that. Starting with number 2, being required to do things you don't think you should do. That's one of those times that when you have to look at your situation, right? And you know there are some things that you can't get away from, say like however many days of standardized testing everybody goes through in the spring, and all of that. You can't get away from that. So that's maybe not a battle that you even should fight, but there are ways to approach that where you can be in control. I'm supposing that it's still possible for a lot of teachers, as they used to say, to shut the door to their classroom and do what they need to do inside. And you can find ways to still be focused on the standardized testing, but also give your students the breaks that they need, do things that activate your gifts. So it's doing things that you don't think you should do. You need to get clear on where your battles are worth fighting. If you're being required to be on numerous committees, and that's too many committees, it's going to be difficult, but no is a powerful word, and to learn where you can say no, where you can't say no, what battles are worth fighting and what aren't. That would help you with number 2, being required to do things you don't think you should do.
Okay, so if there's policies and procedures and timelines that we know we have to abide by, even though we don't really understand why, then we have to find the things that we have going back to number 1, the power and control over within the scope of our practice in order to really fuel ourselves so that we can find satisfaction kind of like within those other
Right.
requirements.
And you did bring up something very interesting. Why is an interesting question. If you've got the kind of relationship with your administrator or your department head or whatever, where you really can ask that question, why, maybe you can find some sort of compromise.
Yeah, before I hit record, you and I were talking a little bit about just a experience I had today with a teacher, and she was sharing that she was very overwhelmed right now from the amount of marking that she felt she had to do. She teaches at a very academic school. There's high community pressure for the teachers to be held accountable, and she's been writing tons and tons of feedback on assignments, and she feels like she has to in order to sort of like defend her marks. So I went through some of that and just asked her like why she feels she needs to do that. What would it look like if she didn't? How could she create a culture for next year where that expectation wasn't on her? Because I do think that there's a difference between what we are actually required to do and what we feel like we're required to do.
Amen. You are so right about that.
And I do wonder with teachers, like sometimes, where does that feeling come from? Like, is it culture? Is it bred into us? Does it develop over time? And eventually, someone has to stand up and say, like, this is too much. We can't keep going like this. And I'm going to be the one to stop
Right.
it. Some of my conversations right now with teachers are around like reducing their mark load by reducing the amount of things that are marked. Like, what would it look like for you and your students if you didn't have 32 marked assignments and you only had 4?
Mm-hmm.
And that I can see people get uncomfortable when I ask that question. It's like, but I have 32.
Yeah. Well, there's so much tradition to that, It gets so wrapped up in that. And there's so many movements now which are kind of controversial, like the standards-based movement and things like that, where you can reduce the marking. The work is still there, but the marking itself is much reduced. It's sort of like when we were all in college and there were like maybe 4 grades to a quarter or to a semester that really counted, right?
Right. And it doesn't mean that the students are not doing rigorous things in class. It's just your method for feedback and for the way that work is coming to you in the classroom is different. There is this mentality that we teach during class, we collect everything, we pack it all up, we walk away, and we mark it at home. I'm like, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't need to be like that. We can change
Right.
that.
It's a matter of thinking outside the box a lot, just like really visualizing what life would look like. Like you said, what if you didn't do that? What could it look like? How could it be? How could you get the results and know that your students are doing what they're supposed to and yet not kill yourself?
Yeah. And that goes into number 3 very nicely, being asked too much.
Right. When I was a student teacher, I thought that my mentor teacher was absolutely nuts because she looked at me and she said, listen, you deserve a life outside of school. You deserve to be who you are. You're a person first and a teacher second. So you need to figure out and hold yourself to a schedule and a routine. Don't create so much marking that you're going to be marking your whole life away. Make it a policy that you don't take work home if that's something, except for very special occasions, and draw those boundaries and don't let those boundaries be crossed, because otherwise you are going to just burn up and fade away so very, very fast. I think that's the thing, setting boundaries. Once you know where your battles are, then you can set your boundaries and know when to say yes and know when to say no. And it keeps you in control. It keeps you from being overworked. And it also keeps you as close into those domains of what you think you should do as possible.
When you work with teachers, do you notice any similarities around their boundary setting or lack of boundaries?
Teachers are very, very helpful people. They
Mhm.
want to give, and they want to do their best. They've just got these huge, huge hearts that just love their students and want to do their best and want to be real, to really do the job well. I know not every teacher was a great student when they were in school, and some of the best teachers were not the best students, but there's still something inside a lot of teachers that, they want to get the A pluses on the rubric. So to my mind, there is working on boundary setting is very, very important skill for a lot of teachers to develop that they might not have. They can set boundaries with their students and their students' behavior, but they have a hard time setting boundaries on what they want to give.
You're right. It's because there's a generosity and there's a desire to help, but if it's not serving you because you're not doing well in other areas of your life because of these boundaries, that's really problematic.
If you are the proverbial empty cup and you don't have anything to give, you're really not serving your students. There's so many sayings. Put your oxygen mask on before you put the oxygen mask on your child on a crashing plane, and things like that. But it's really true. If you are not solid inside, if you are not whole for yourself, you can't offer your gifts because you've given them all away. You can't be fulfilled because you just don't have the energy to do it. And if you're not offering your gifts and if you're not being fulfilled, you're not there to be present for your students. You're not there to be compassionate for your students. You're not there to be inspiring for your students when you're teaching your stuff, because you're just withering inside.
Okay, so moving on to number 4 around
Yes.
conflicts. What can we do about conflicts?
Experiencing a conflict with a coworker. Well, first of all, it's good to have some objective somebody to talk it out with, and try and figure out. In any conflict, each party is bringing something to the conflict, and I'm not going to say somebody's right or somebody's wrong, but each party is bringing something that's contributing to the conflict. And so first of all, it's good to have an objective person who's maybe not even involved in the workplace, who you can talk to about that conflict and about what's going on, so people can decide objectively who's bringing what. And then finding ways to set plans to address the conflict, because conflict avoidance is not always the best plan. Now, there are some times, like in your situation, where you did try and address things a bit with the principal that you talked about, but that wasn't something that she was open to and was not something that was going to help. So in that way, maybe just having this objective third party so that you don't have to bring that conflict into the workplace all the time is good. Definitely talking it out is good if that's a possibility, finding a compromise or finding ways to seal off your energy and just let it go, which sounds really, really difficult, but just being like letting it go. Now, in the situation you were talking about, you had 5 years of difficulty, because I think maybe because you didn't have the words to put to it, and where somebody is saying, oh, this administrator is going to leave in 5 years, or is going to leave soon, and you're going to be fine, just tough it out. If you can develop practices that allow you to just like let it wash over you and wash away, and just be like, that's that person, it's not me. I have faith in who I am. I have strength in who I am. I know I'm a good teacher. That's where it really counts. And that's where just having somebody to talk to about it who can see you objectively is a really good thing.
In that kind of scenario, in your opinion, what's the difference between talking about it in a productive way and just complaining and venting?
I think when you're complaining and venting, what you really, really want is for somebody to be there saying, oh, yeah, you're right. That's awful. That person, oh, my God, how horrible that is, But talking about it in a productive way is taking ownership of what you're bringing into the conflict, taking ownership of what's going on with you, and hearing that reflected back to you, hearing the suggestions about that, and actually, instead of looking for somebody to reinforce your feelings, looking for avenues where you can reinforce yourself and your faith in yourself and the strength that you've got, as well as find tactics that you can take that can maybe relieve the conflict a bit.
That's great. Because I know, like, during that time for me, I would go out with coworkers after work and on Friday nights specifically, and there would just be like a lot of venting and complaining at the table. And at the time, I thought what I was doing, and everyone was participating, it wasn't just me, and it was just about work in general and whatever was happening. But what I thought was I was doing at the time was like releasing the negative energy for my weekend, like letting it go so that I can have a great weekend. Now I've learned really that I was just kind of like stewing in it, and it wasn't actually doing anything for me. It was just kind of like reliving what I had gone through that week or that day or that month out loud over and over again. So thanks for that perspective, because I think it's hard to for people that are in something to understand the difference between a productive conversation around conflict and then just being negative and staying in that negativity.
Yeah, and it's also contributing to kind of a culture of negativity when you get back to work on Monday too, because everybody's heard it, everybody's talked about it, everybody's joined in.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so number 5, feeling stuck.
Yeah, feeling stuck in a job you dislike with no alternatives. There's, first of all, that takes a lot of, I think, good soul searching, because teachers are taught sometimes by just the culture at large that they don't have anything to offer beyond being a teacher. You got to do some soul searching and find out, am I unhappy here because I'm unhappy in this school building with this people and these situations, but I'm really, really happy with being a teacher? Because then you know that your alternative is that you can find a different situation. You can find a different school district or a different building or whatever, depending, like if you teach in the city of Chicago, there's a lot of different schools, even in the district you can go to. If you're in a small district, like where I came from, you have to leave the district entirely. But, find out, is it the place that you are, or is it the job that you're doing? If it's your place, you can change it. If it's that teaching is no longer for you, then you can look at your alternatives, because man, you have skills as a teacher which can be applied all over the place outside of teaching. Teachers are great salespeople. I don't know if many teachers are aware of that. What you do every single day is you're selling learning to your kids. Teachers are great project managers, because that's what you do every day. There's so many things that can be done, but it starts with the soul searching of knowing if you're still in love with teaching, if that's where your gifts are going, if that's where you feel fulfilled, or if you need to move out. And then you need to move out very, very carefully, because you don't want to jump from something that's draining you and demoralizing you into something that you hate just because you're trying to jump. You need to be very, very purposeful and intentional in what you do.
Why would a teacher want to work with somebody like you who's a coach?
First of all, I feel like a coach's job, or at least my job as a coach, is to help somebody access their vision for greater potential in their lives, and then to support and guide them toward realizing it. That's sort of the difference between I feel like between a coach and a therapist. Is coaches are about, what do you want? What's your greater potential? What do you want to bring into your life? And then let's get you there. And I do that by helping you get clarity on what's contributing to the demoralization, to the burnout, to the lack of joy, and help you decide what you need to feel free to use your gifts. And then I help you with possible tools you can use to achieve those goals. And me personally, I'm a big believer in the work that Sean Aker and the folks at Harvard have been doing around happiness, because it's been proven by this research that they've done that happy people are more productive, they're more inspiring, they're more fulfilled, they're using their gifts more. And the thing to know is, like, your definition of happiness. A lot of people find happiness sort of frivolous, but if you think of happiness as the extent to which you're fulfilled as a human being, and that the pathway to the fulfillment is contributing to other people's lives, and also the extent to which you're able to use your gifts to contribute to other people's lives, that's where I come in. I help with that vision. I help figure out what your gifts are, where you can use them, what's really going to move you forwards, so that you can take all those qualities consistently into the classroom and keep that cup filled, so that you're able to give and give.
I think that there's a lot of people who don't really understand what coaches do. I've had a number of coaches on the show. I'm actually a coach in two different areas. I'm a wellness coach, and I just completed a type of coaching that is actually for educators called cognitive coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I've talked quite a bit about coaching on the show, but people seem to think that they can get themselves out of that rut themselves. Like, I just want to think about what I like and what makes me happy. And the reason that coaching works is because there's someone else guiding you.
Yeah. And it's the accountability too, because you can come up with a plan and all of that, but it's also the accountability. It's the coming back and knowing that in a week or 2 weeks or a month, you're going to have, if you're working one-on-one with a coach, one person who's going, so how'd it go with that thing? You wanted to carve out more time in your life, and you said that you were going to say no to this activity, and this activity. Did you do that? And, there's the knowing that you're going to have to check back with somebody, Or in the case of, being involved in a coaching community or a mastermind group or whatever, there's the combined mindset and the combined accountability and the combined celebration that happens in all of that too, that makes coaching so powerful. You're absolutely right.
So tell me about your book and your show.
This was something really exciting that's happened for me in the past couple of weeks. I was approached by an online streaming network that's going to be devoted to personal development 24/7. It's called Transformation TV, and I'm one of 120 people in the world that have been invited to be a part of this newly forming network, where I'm going to be hosting a weekly show that's going to be starting up at the end of the summer. I'm going to do 2 episodes are going to be with where I interview world-changing educators and people working in education, or just people who are I think are going to be super inspiring to teachers, to help them see, to help all of us see the good in people and the good in what we do and where things are moving forward in a positive way. And then 2 of the episodes are going to be me doing some sort of talking about a particular subject and giving tips and hints and stuff. And that's going to start up at the end of the fall. We're in development now, and I'm starting to film my episodes right now. Transformation TV has also contracted me to write a book for them. And I'm going back and forth on the title. It's either going to be The Teacherless Classroom or The Teacherless School. And it's going to be centered on demoralization, where it fits in the whole so-called teacher shortage that we're having, because it's very controversial to me. There's certain people that are saying that it's all about the money, and if you paid teachers more, then teachers would be just fine. While I agree that teachers need more money, we are definitely underpaid. I don't think that's the whole of it, And so I'm going to be developing that idea. I'm going to be offering tips to fight demoralization, tips and stuff. And it's going to be a combination of a self-help book and a kind of a report on the state of teaching and teacher demoralization.
That's super exciting. So we definitely have to keep in touch and find out when all of that's happening and update some links and get your videos out to people and find out how we can find out more about Transformation TV. And then when your book's out, getting it into people's hands.
That would be great.
This is it's such fantastic work that you're doing. I'm really glad that I reached out. I mean, for me, sometimes it's hard to be like, hey, hello, random stranger. I saw one post that you had and I want to have a conversation. But I'm really glad that I did, because this has it's been so helpful just for me personally to kind of go through what that time in my life was. And if this helps, anyone out there that's like, hey, I'm not burned out, I'm actually going through this.
Mm-hmm.
That's so incredible. So how can people connect with you, find out more about you and the work that you're doing, and quite possibly even work with you?
Diana Z at Naturally Free is my handle on Instagram. They can also send me an email, dznaturallyfree@gmail.com. I offer chats, getting acquainted chats where we can talk about what people are going through and just discover if it's possible that I can help you at all. I do those for free. They're like 20, 30-minute calls, and we do them on Zoom. And I work with people throughout the country, throughout the world. So I would love to hear with anybody who's got any questions or wants to just say, hey, I heard you, by direct DMing me on Instagram. I tend to live on Instagram right now. So
yeah, that's great. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. The work that you're doing is fantastic. And on behalf of teachers everywhere, we want to thank you for all of the great things that you're about to do.
You're making me blush. And thank you. This was really an awesome experience. I love your podcasts. I've been listening to them since you reached out to me, and they're amazing. So thank you for what you're doing too.
Thank you so much. How great was that? Have you ever considered that it's not burnout? It's actually demoralization. I'm so glad that I reached out to Diana. You should definitely do the same. And while you're on Instagram, it's time for you to start following Outside the Bubble podcast. We now have an Instagram account, and I really need you to keep me accountable because I am not doing so well over there on the gram. And again, thank you so much for everything that you do, teachers. There is no other profession on the planet that is like teaching. We get to inspire and impact future generations every single day. And the work that you're doing, whatever you're doing right now, is exactly what you need to be doing. You are doing a fantastic job, and you are enough. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Outside the Bubble. I'll see you in 2 weeks.